Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation entitled Sage Intacct Bank Reconciliation Beyond the Paper Statement. We planned a 1 hour CPE session on all things bank reconciliation in Sage Intacct. I'm Brian Terrell. I'm the CPA and managing partner at Legible, and joining me today is Hang King Nguyen, a senior consultant here at Legible, and Declan Chi, another senior or solution consultant here at Legible. I'd like to just go around the room and introduce today's speakers. As I mentioned, I'm Brian Terrell, and I have been for 35 years helping our customers find accounting and financial software solutions to the biggest challenges in the back office. Declan?
Yeah, I'm Declan Gia, and I'm a solution consultant with Ledgerable, working with construction finance teams evaluating Sage Intacct. On to you, Hanking.
Yeah, and I'm Hanking Nguyen, and senior consultant at Ledgerable and a Sage Intacct certified accounting and implementation consultant. I specialize in Sage Intacct implementation and have worked with clients across industries, including construction, healthcare, and nonprofit. I'm excited to be here today and share some practical insights with you.
Mm. Thanks, guys. Before we get started, I need to cover just a couple of housekeeping items. If you're here for CPE, today's presentation and all Legible webinars qualify for an hour of CPE credit. We do need for you to respond to the polling questions that pop up from time to time throughout the presentation, and we'll practice on one of those in just a second. But in addition, you'll receive a post-webinar evaluation form next, tomorrow or the day after. We need you to reply back to that because it helps us check all of the requirements off that the Texas State Board of Public Accountancy gives us. To show you exactly what these polling questions look like, we'll see, first of all, a slide like this, and then a pop-up box, which you're seeing that Zoom provides. This practice question is really important to us. The question is, do you need a CPE credit? If you'll answer that correctly, it'll give you both the practice you need in order to navigate our polling requirement, but also give us information to help us understand what the expectations are of those. How many people here are in expecting a CPE credit? So it's an important practice question for us. We want you to answer these questions in 20 seconds or so as we move through the presentation. It's much less about getting it right or wrong as it is to making sure you check the box. So please look for, anticipate those, and answer those. A few more quick housekeeping items. We've disabled both the audio and video for all participants today in order to minimize distractions. That doesn't mean we're not welcoming your questions, and to submit a question to Hong King or to Declan to answer at the end of the presentation, use that Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar. Once you place that question in the queue, we'll be able to get to that before we wrap up today. And then one final thing, we're recording today's presentation. We hope that you'll take the link that we'll send you to that recording in the next couple of days and review the highlights of the presentation, or pass it on, share it with colleagues who are unable to join us today, or if you have peers in the industry who would be interested in this information, please pass that on to them as well. That's all of our housekeeping items. Let's get started. I'll ask Declan to kick us off by sharing our presentation objectives. Declan?
I appreciate that, Brian. That was a great introduction. Let me start with a question for everyone. How many business days into the month does your team, close the books? For a lot of construction and field service teams, the honest answer is later than we'd like. And when we go, dig into why, bank reconciliation is almost always one of the culprits. Think about what it takes today. That's multiple bank and credit card accounts, thousands of transactions a month, someone pulling a statement and matching it against a ledger line by line. It's slow, it's manual, and it's the kind of work that quietly burns out your best people. Today, we're going to show you a better way. I'll start with the challenges of manual bank reconciliation, the why behind today. Then Hanking takes the core of the session, getting those bank transactions into Sage Intacct, automated matching, and of course the creation rules that handle predictable activities. So that's a lot of jargon, but we'll tackle it later on. He'll also walk through a demo of importing bank transactions in this part. So that's really the section you want to watch closely. I'll come back to tie it together with reconciliation best practices, how to run what we've covered month after month, and then we'll, of course, open it up for your questions. As Brian mentioned, we've got a few quick polls along the way for those earning CPE, so responding to them is how you qualify. So please keep an eye out on those polls. So on to the learning objectives. So by the end of the hour, you'll learn 4 things. First, you'll be able to name the specific inefficiencies and risk hiding in a manual bank rec, so you can spot them in your own process. Second, you'll understand the 2 ways to get bank activity into Intacct. That's feeds and imports and when to use each. Third, you'll see how matching and creation rules streamline the reconciliation itself. And fourth, you'll walk away with a practical, best practices to reduce manual effort, improve your accuracy, and accelerate your close. So every piece today is about closing faster and knowing your cash is accurate. So let's start, with the problem this whole session is built around, the way most teams still reconcile a bank account by hand. Picture month end, and this may be applicable to many of you. Someone is chasing a paper or a PDF statement, then going down the general ledger line by line, taking off what agrees and circling what doesn't. On one operating account, that's pretty tedious. Now imagine across all the bank and credit card accounts a construction or field services company runs. It becomes the single thing that holds up close. Now over the next few minutes, I'll show you exactly where that manual process breaks down and why effort is being spent in the wrong place. Then Hanking will show how Sage Intacct flips it into an exception-based process. So here's the real problem. When you reconcile by hand, you have to check every transaction to catch the few that are wrong. So an account with thousands of transactions eats hours, even if only perhaps 3 of them are off. So you're spending the majority of your time confirming what was already correct. The main point I'm trying to get over here is that work grows with how many transactions you have, not how many problems there are. So why does it eat so much time? There's a few reasons. You're going down the statement and ledger line by line, which is slow no matter how good you are. Then you multiply that by every account you run. And of course, the more accounts, the worse it gets. And on top of that, you've got timing differences like deposits in transit or outstanding checks. Now, they're perfectly normal, but you still have to track down and explain each one. Anything missing, duplicated, or recorded wrong, you probably catching by eye. And every figure someone types in by hand is a chance to fat finger an amount, a date, or a check number. So really, it's not that your team is slow, it's that the process forces them to recheck everything just to find the few things that need attention. Now, just as a small break before we go, I want to hear from you. Here's our next poll. I'll leave it up for around 20 seconds. What's the biggest challenge your team faces during bank reconciliation? Is it too much manual too much manual matching? Is it unrecorded bank feeds or other transactions? Maybe investigating exceptions and timing differences, or just overall, perhaps reconciliation takes too long to complete. Once again, there's no wrong answers. This just helps us learn from you too. And of course, you'll notice later that each option matches directly to something Sage Intacct is built to take off your plate. All right, now we're gonna, whatever your biggest pain point is, it usually shows up as one of a few specific risks. So let's take a look at them. So when reconciliation is done by hand, the risk tends to show up in 4 predictable places. That is unrecorded bank activity, which are fees, interest, merchant charges the team doesn't know about until the statement arrives. So there's no bill, no entry until someone spots it. Second is timing differences, items posted in one period at the bank and another in the ledger. Now, of course, this is normal, but each one needs to be found and explained. Perhaps there are duplicate or incorrect entries, that is, amounts, dates, or check numbers that don't agree between the two records. And the one that hurts most operationally, a close that waits on cash. Because all these surface at once during month end instead of being resolved as they occur. The last point is the real cost. It's not just the hours, it's a slower close and a cash position you can't fully trust until the very end. So how do we fix it? We have to change the shape of the work itself. So this slide is the whole thesis of today in one picture. And I'm going to keep it short because Hanking is about to show you every piece on the right-hand column. So the left is the manual process we've been discussing, right? Statements and ledgers side by side. You'll compare every transaction one at a time, confirm what it's already agrees, investigate the rest with whatever time is left. And then you'll repeat that for every account every month. And once again, just notice the amount of effort that goes into confirming things that were never wrong. Now, on the right is the Intacct supported process. So what happens is bank activity comes in automatically. There's rules that Hanking will showcase later, right? You can set up to clear the predictable activity. And the team reviews a short exception list rather, instead of a full statement. So reconciliation becomes ongoing rather than a month-end scramble. So that's really the big shift you're going to see. You stop reviewing everything and you just start reviewing only what's different or incorrect. Now I'm going to pass it over to Hanking, who's going to introduce how Intacct can help, first off, with automation.
All right, thank you, Declan. So now that we have talked about some of the challenges with the manual bank reconciliation process, let's look at how Sage Intacct can help automate it. The first step is simply getting the bank activity into Intacct. Before Intacct can match anything, it needs to know what actually happened at the bank. So the first is bank feed. With a bank fee, transactions come into Intacct through a connections with the bank. So instead of downloading the files and uploading it manually, the bank activity is brought into Intacct for you. That means less file handling for the accounting team and more streamlined process. The second option is transaction imports. With this method, the accounting team downloads the transaction file from the bank and then upload it into Sage Intacct. This is useful when a bank feed isn't available. It can also be helpful if you need to bring in missing transactions or if your team prefers to manage the files directly. So the two methods work a little differently, but they can get us to the same place. At the end of the day, we now have the bank activity inside Sage Intacct. And once it's there, Intacct can start comparing those bank transactions with a transaction already recorded in the system. That's what's set up for the next part, which is transaction matching and creation. So let's start with more automated options, which is bank feed. And the high level is pretty straightforward. We have a bank on one side and Sage Intacct on the other, and the bank feeds creates the connection between the two. Once an account is connected to a supported bank feed, transactions can come into Sage Intacct without the accounting team having to download and upload a file each time. And that really gives us two main benefits. The first is less manual work. With the bank feed, someone may have to log into the bank, choose the right accounts, select the day range, download the transaction, save the file, and then upload it to the Sage Intacct. That may not sound like a lot for one account, but what if we are doing across 10, 20, or 50 accounts, right? Congratulations, you have just got a great way to spend your entire morning clicking download and download. With the bank feeds, a lot of repetitive files handling goes away, and the bank activity is brought into Intacct for you, so the accounting team has fewer manual touch points and less time spent moving data from one system to another. And the second benefit is that the bank activity is available earlier. This is important because reconciliation doesn't have to wait until the end of the month. As bank activity becomes available in Intacct, the accounting team can start reviewing and matching transactions throughout the month. So instead of getting a month in and looking at the entire months of the activity all at once, you can begin working through it earlier. And if something doesn't match or something looks unusual, you have a chance to identify it sooner. That's really where the bank fees start to change the reconciliation process. It's not just about saving a few clicks, it helps move the reconciliation from a month-end task to a more ongoing process. Bank fees are very convenient, as we know, but I also don't want to give the impressions that every organization or every bank account has to use one. There are a few common reasons why a file-based process may still make more sense. The first is simply availability. Not every financial institution supports the same type of connection. And even within the same bank, availability can vary by account type or by specific service being used. So in some cases, a bank fee may just not be available for a particular account. The second reason is internal policy. Some organizations have security, treasury, or IT policy that limit how banking systems can be connected to the outside applications. So even a bank fee is technically available, the organization may prefer to keep more control over how that data is moving to Intacct. And the third reason is flexibility. There may be situations where a bank fee is being used, but the accounting team still needs to bring in additional transactions or fill in activity that didn't come through the fee. So in those cases, a file import can be a very useful way to supplement the bank fee. So I don't really think of a bank fee and and the file import as two competing solutions. In many cases, they are simply two different ways of getting the same bank side activity into Sage Intacct. And once that activity is in Intacct, the reconciliation process is essentially the same. With the new bank transaction assistant experience, which I'm going to mention later, file import can also work alongside bank fee data, which gives the accounting team more flexibility than the classic import process. So with that in mind, let's look at the second option, which is file import. The second way to bring bank activity into Sage Intacct is through a files import using the bank transaction assistant. The process is pretty straightforward as well. The accounting and treasury team downloads a transactions file from the bank, and instead of connecting the bank directly to Intacct, we upload the file into Sage Intacct. But there's one important distinction here. This is not a direct import into the general ledger. We're not saying every roles in a bank file should automatically become a accounting transactions. What we are bringing into Intacct is the bank's versions of the activity, which clear the bank when it's clear and for how much. So that information then becomes a reference point for the reconciliation. Intacct can compare those bank side transactions against the transactions that already exist in the accounting system and apply the accounts matching rules. So if there's already a corresponding transaction in Intacct, the system can work through the matching of the two. And if something doesn't line up, that activity can be reviewed as part of the reconciliation process. We will cover that matching part in detail later. But the key idea is that the bank file is giving Sage Intacct something to match, to compare against. It is not automatically post activity into the GL. That's why file imports can still work very well with automated matching. The way the bank data gets into Intacct is different from the bank fee, but once it's there, the reconciliation workflow can continue in much the same way. And before I demonstrate the import, I want to spend a couple minutes on an important change Sage has made to this process. Some of you may be familiar with what Sage call the classic bank transaction import. In the classics process, importing bank activities was closely tied to the reconciliation itself. You would typically start a reconciliation, bring the bank transaction as part of that process, and then work through the reconciliation from there. The new bank transaction assistant file import, however, works a little differently. The simplest way I think about the difference is this. The classic process is reconciliation centered, and the new process is transaction centered. So with the bank transaction assistance, I don't have to wait until I'm ready to start a reconciliation before I bring bank activity into Sage Intacct. Instead, I can import a file earlier, and those bank-side transactions are stored in Intacct and remain available for me to work with. So that changed the timing of the process quite a bit. Let's take an example. Let's say my month end is August 31st, right? Under a more traditional process, I might wait until the beginning of the September and I download the full months of the bank activity and then start working through everything all at once. But with the bank transaction assistant, I don't necessarily have to do that. I could import activity daily. I can do it weekly, or I could just follow whatever schedules make sense for the organization. And the important point is that I can get the bank activity into Intacct before the month end. And once it's there, it can start going through the matching process. So by the time I reach month end, I may already have a significant proportion of the activity match, and I can focus more of my attentions on the exceptions. So that's one of the biggest practical differences between the two approaches. Um, and there are several others improvement in the newer process. One is the file format support. The classic import is more limited, with Bank Transaction Assistant supports a broader range of formats, including the CSV, XLS, QIF, QFX, and so on. That gives the accounting team more flexibility because different banks may provide transaction data in different formats. Another difference is visibility. With the new process, import bank transactions are stored in Intacct can be viewed from the centralized bank transaction list. And with the Sage Intacct 2026 Release 1, bank transaction assistant file import data can also appear on the accounts banking cloud tab alongside the bank feeds activity. So once the bank activity is in the system, the experience becomes much more consistent, whether that data comes from a bank fee or from a file. And that leads to another important improvement. Bank Transaction Assistant can work alongside a bank feeds. So under the classic process, using a file import on an account that already have bank feed activity could create problems with unreconciled fees transaction or existing matches. The newer process is designed so that the import bank transactions can coexist with the bank fee data. So you might use a bank fee as your normal process, but still use a file import when you need to supplement missing transactions or bringing additional, activities. That gives the accounting team a lot more flexibility. And Sage has also announced that the classic input experience will be retired in a future release. So for now, the classic process may still be available in some environments, but for a given account, you can use either the bank transaction assistant file import experience or the classic process. You cannot use both at the same time. So the main takeaway of this is the newer process give you more flexibility and around when you import what formats you can use, where the transactions are stored, and how files imports can work alongside the bank feeds. So without further ado, let's actually look at what the process looks like in Sage Intacct. Hello everyone, in this session, I'm going to walk you through the new Bank's Transaction Assistant import features in Sage Intacct. This feature provides an alternative way to import bank statements in addition to the traditional import options available on the bank reconciliation page. Before you can use this new import feature, there are a few prerequisites. First, an administrator must enable the Bank Transaction Assistant feature in Sage Cloud Services under the subscription page. The administrator will also need to grant the appropriate permissions to users who will be working with the feature. Once those permissions have been assigned, users will be able to import bank transactions using the new Bank Transaction Assistant file import. For this demonstration, the feature has already been enabled in my system, and I have the necessary permissions to perform the import. If you do not see this feature in your Sage Intacct environment, you may need to contact your administrator or consultants for assistance to enable it. To begin, navigate to Cash Management, and then go to All, and select Bank Transaction Import File. On this page, you will see a list of files that have already been imported. To start a new import, click Add. Once you are on the Imports Bank Transaction page, select the bank account you want to import transactions for, and then click Continue. This will take you to the File Imports page. If you do not already have a file prepared for the import, you can use the help link on this page to view the supported file formats. There are several options available, including a 3-column file, a 4-column file, a QIF file, or a QFX file. For this demonstration, I will be using 4-column CSV template. You can click Learn More to download the template, then you can open the downloaded template, remove the sample transactions, and then enter the transaction from your bank statement. In addition to the 4 default columns, you can add more columns to include more details of your transactions. I have already prepared and populate a 4-column templates for this demonstration. Now, going back to Sage Intacct and upload the prepare file. After Sage Intacct processes the file, you'll be taken to the review page containing the transactions from the uploaded file. Take a moment to review the transactions and make sure the information is correct. Once you are satisfied with the data, proceed with the import. The import may take a few minutes to process. During this time, Sage Intacct will display the message letting you know that the import is in progress. Once the import has been completed, the transaction will become available in the bank transaction list. Now let's verify that import was successful. At the beginning of this demonstration, there were only 2 records in the bank transaction input file page. After completing the import, we can now see the 3rd record for the imported file. To confirm that the individual transactions were imported, navigate to Cash Management and then select Bank Transactions. Here you will see the transactions that were included in the file we just imported. You can also verify the transactions from the bank reconciliation page. Navigate to Bank Transaction, select the bank accounts you import the transaction for, and click Continue. You'll see 2 tabs. Select the Bank tab, and the newly imported transaction would now appear on the bank reconciliation page. And that's it. That's how you can import a bank statement into Sage Intacct using the new Bank Transaction Assistant File Import feature. Thank you for watching. All right, so at this point, we have brought the bank size activity into Sage Intacct, either through a bank fee or a file import. Once that activity is in the system, the next step is matching. So let's look at how Sage Intacct use matching rules to compare bank transactions with what's already recorded in the system. We now have the bank size of the activity in Sage Intacct. So what does Intacct actually do with those transactions next? So for each transactions, there are really 3 possible outcomes. The first possibility is that the transactions already exist in Sage Intacct. Maybe it's a custom receipt or AP payments, a check, or another transactions that the accounting team has already recorded. In that case, we want Intacct to find the existing transaction and match it. The second possibility is that the bank transaction does not exist in Intacct yet, but it's something predictable that we know how to account for. A bank service fee is a good example. In that case, we might want Intacct to create a accounting transactions for us and then match it. And the third possibility is that the Intacct cannot confidently do either one. In that case, we want the transactions to remain unmatched so that somebody on the accounting team can review it. That's really the purpose of the reconciliation rules. We are trying to automate what's predictable while leaving the exceptions for human review. Before we look at an individual matching rule, I want to introduce one important concept, which is the rule set. A rule set is essentially the collections of matching rules and creation rules that Sage Intacct use for a particular bank or credit card account. And the order of those rules matters. Think about it like a waterfall. A bank transaction enter at the top, and Sage Intacct evaluates against the rules in sequence. We normally want the most specific matching rules at the top, and then we can gradually move toward the broader matching rules. And finally, after the Intacct has tried to find an existing transactions, we place our creation rules at the bottom. That sequence is very important. We don't want Intacct create a new journal entries for something that actually already exists in the accounting system. So the basic philosophy is like this. First, try to match what already exists, and then create only what's still missing. For example, I might start with a very specific rule that says match the amount, the document number, and the exact posting date. If that does not find a match, the next rule would be match the amounts and document numbers, but allow the posting date to be within the few days. And then I might have a broader rules that use amounts and posting date without requiring the document number. Only after those matching rules has been evaluated would I want the creation rule to run. That sequencing give us an automation, but it also give us control. Now let's take a closer look at what is actually inside a matching rule. This is an example of a matching rules in Sage Intacct. There are three concepts I want you to pay attention on the screen, which is filtering, grouping, and matching conditions. And they answer the three slightly different questions. First, we can use filter. A filter does not actually determine whether two transactions match. Instead, it narrows down which transaction the rule should ever consider. For example, maybe I'm creating a rule specifically for checks. I could filter the bank transactions based on the document type so that this will only look at checks. Or perhaps I only want the rules to evaluate debit transactions, right? So the more accurately I can narrow down the populations of the transactions, the less likely I'm going to create an unintended match. So I think about filters as answering these questions. Which transactions should this rule consider? And the second concept is grouping. Not every reconciliation is one bank transactions to one Intacct transactions. Sometimes the bank give us one combined amount while Sage Intacct contains several individual transactions. So grouping answers another questions. Should I evaluate these transactions individually or together? Take another example. Perhaps three customer receipts are recorded separately in Intacct. One $2,000, one 1,500, another 1,500. But those received were deposited together, so the bank only shows one deposit of $5,000. Without grouping, none of these three individual transactions equals the $5,000 bank's deposits, but collectively they do. A matching rule can group transactions so Sage Intacct can evaluate the combined total against the bank's transactions. The reverse type of situation can also occur, which is where multiple bank side transactions relate to a single Intacct transactions. And finally, we have actual matching conditions. This is where we tell Intacct that what needs to be agreed between the bank's transactions and the Intacct transactions. So for example, amounts equals amount, and document number equals document number, and posting day equals posting date, or perhaps posting date are within a day range. Let's look at two simple examples. In the first example, we have a check. So the bank shows check numbers 001245 for $2,350, and we have a check in Sage Intacct for the same amount. Here, Sage Intacct can also compare the document number, and we can allow some flexibility around the date. So even though the check was recorded in Intacct on August 12th and cleared the bank on August 14th, it can still consider a match because the amounts and the check number agree and the day fall within a allowed range. Now look at the second example, a customer receipt. In this case, we might not have a document number that we want to use for matching, so the rules can be simpler. We can compare the amounts and then allow the posting day to fall within the day range. So the key point here is that the Intacct is not just looking for something that seems close. We define the conditions that make a match acceptable, and those conditions can be different depending on the type of transactions we're trying to match. But that also means there will be times where a bank transaction simply does not meet those conditions. And that's actually an important part of the process because a good matching rule should know when not to make a match. So let's look at the simple example here. Suppose the bank shows an ACH withdrawal for $1,250. Sage looks at this transaction already in the system and applies the matching rules we have defined, but this time it cannot find a reliable match. Maybe the account's amount is different, maybe the reference information is missing, or maybe the time falls outside the range we have allowed. In that situation, I do not want Intacct to guess. Because when accounting software start guessing, that's usually when accountants start getting nervous. So yeah, I want that bank transactions to stay unmatched. And that's not necessarily a failure of the automation. Sometimes unmatched is exactly the right result because it tells the accounting team that the transaction needs attention rather than allowing the system to make an uncertain match. From there, the team can review any exceptions and determine what happened. Whether that's a timing issue, sometimes was recorded incorrectly, or there's just simply no Intacct transaction to match yet because it hasn't been created. And that's last scenario is especially important. If there's nothing in Intacct to match against, matching rules can only take us so far. So that's where creation rules come into the process. So instead of asking which existing transaction does this bank activity match, we're now asking, should Sage Intacct create a missing transaction for us? So let's use a very common example, a $35 bank service charge. The bank automatically deducts $35 from our checking accounts. That transaction appears in the bank's activity, but nobody in AP create a bill for it, and nobody manually create a journal entry. The bank, unfortunately, never forgets to record a bank fee, even if we do. So when Intacct runs through the matching rules, there's nothing on the accounting sides to match. Without additional automations, that $35 would remain unmatched. The accountants would need to identify the fee, create a journal entry, post it, return to the reconciliations, find the entries, and then match it against the bank transactions. Well, it's not difficult, but it's repetitive. And if we see the same type of transaction every month, that is a good candidate for a creation rule. Before we build the creation rule itself, we first need a transaction template. I like to explain the difference between the templates and the rule this way. So the templates answers how should I account for this, and the creation rule would answer when should I do it. So here is our transaction templates for the bank service fees. So in this example, we are telling Sage Intacct that when the template is used, we want to create a journal entry. We define the journal, we define the offset GL accounts, in this case, our bank service charge expense account. We can also define information such as location and department, depending on our accounting structure. The bank account itself provides the cash size of the transaction. So the template is essentially giving Intacct the accounting instructions it needs to turn that bank activity into a journal entry. There's also an important control here. For journal entries templates, we can decide whether the transactions should be created as drafted or a posted status. If this transaction is predictable and the organization is comfortable with the automation, it makes sense to create it as a posted state. But if the organization wants the additional approval or review step, it can create a draft journal entry instead. So creation rules does not necessarily means that we have removed accounting outright. We can determine the appropriate level of automation based on your organization's controls requirement. Now, Sage Intacct know how to create the transaction. We need to define when it should use the template. That's the purpose of a creation rule. For our bank service feed example, I might define a rule to look for several characteristics. First, I can limit it to bank transactions before or after a specific posting date. That effective date control is particularly important with the creation rule because we do not want certainly create transaction against historical bank activity that was already handled another way. Then I might specify that this needs to be a debit or money out transactions, and then I could look at the bank descriptions, like for example, uh, description contains service fee, service charge. So in the incoming bank transaction satisfies those criteria, and the previous matching rules did not find an existing transaction, the creation rule can use our bank service fee templates to create that journal entry. And once the journal entry is created, Sage can associate it back to the bank transactions for reconciliation and match. So our $35 bank service charge goes from the left side. We have a $35 service charge in the bank, but have nothing in Intacct. And to the right side, we have $35 service charge in the bank matched with the same $35 journal entries in Intacct without the accountant have to manually create that journal entry. So if we put everything from this webinar sections together, the process looks like this. So first of all, we bring the bank activity into Sage Intacct using either the bank feed or the bank transaction assistant file import. And then the accounts rule sets evaluate that bank activity. Matching rules looks for transactions that already exist in Intacct. They can use filter, grouping, and matching conditions to define what a reliable match looks like. If the transaction does not already exist, certain predictable transactions can move to creation rules. The creation rules identify the bank transactions, and then the transaction templates tells Intacct how the corresponding accounting transaction should be created. And anything that cannot be matched or safely created remains available for the accounting team to review as an exception. So ultimately, the workflows becomes what's in showing on the right side. Bring in the bank data, match what already exists, create what's predictably missing, and focus your accounting review on everything else. That's how Sage Intacct can shift bank reconciliation away from repetitive line-by-line comparison and toward a much more exception driven process. All right, so before we move on, I'd like to get a quick sense of how everything is handling bank transactions today. Are you primarily comparing printed or PDF bank statements manually? Are you using spreadsheets to compare bank activity against the GL? Do you already have some like automated matching in your accounting system? Or is the process mostly automated where your team is primarily review the exceptions? Okay. All right. We start to see some response coming in. It looks like we have a mix of approach here. Okay, great. And that's helpful context as we move into the next part of the discussions. And with that, I will handle it back to Declan to work us through some best practice of the bank reconciliations.
Yeah, appreciate that, Hanking. We've got a lot to unpack. So you've seen how it all works, feeds and imports, matching rules, and the creation rules. That's the setup. What I want to cover is how you'd run this month after month so it keeps, saving you time. I have personally seen teams turn all of this on, and then 6 months later, they're back to a month-end scramble, And it's not because the software stopped working, but because they let the process slip. So I'm going to give you 4 habits that keep it working. And the first one matters the most. Everything else builds upon it. And that's to reconcile continuously. So stop treating reconciliation as a month-end event. And here's why that matters so much. Remember what Hanking showed you with a bank feed or with a bank transaction assistant. The bank activity lands in Intacct throughout the month, and the rules start matching it as it arrives. So that capability is wasted if nobody looks until the first week of the following month. So look at the old way on the left, right? You wait for a statement, you sit down, reconcile a full month at once. There are problems with this, right? First, the time you took to look at it, there's a significant difference. It might be 3 or 4 weeks old, and it's possible that the person who remembered it has moved on, or perhaps the details of it are simply forgotten. And then that 2-minute question becomes a 20-minute investigation. Now, second of all of that work piles into the same few days at month end, the exact days your close is already fighting for. So the best way is found on the right, because the feed is always current. If somebody spends a few minutes daily or even weekly reviewing what the rules matched and clearing what didn't, differences surface while they're fresh. And you'll probably still remember the deposit. You'll know what the ACH was, so you can clear it in seconds. And really the big payoff is by the time month end arrives, most of the reconciliation is already done. You're not starting a marathon on day 1 of close. You're just confirming a short list and finalizing. So one concrete way to make it stick is to put a 15-minute block on the calendar 2 or 3 times a week for whoever owns cash. That small, boring, kind of reoccurring habit is what replaces that giant month-end block. Next, we have habits 2 and 3. Keep your controls and run a clean exception process. Let's start with controls first, because it's the number one objection I hear when a team sees this much automation, right? The worry is, if Intacct's creating and matching transactions, are we losing control of our books? And that's a fair question, which Hanking talked about briefly earlier, right? Although the answer is no, you're not losing control, you do have to set it up right. So Hanking talked about creation rules. You choose whether an auto-created entry posts directly or lands as a draft for review. That setting is that dial for how much automation you're comfortable with, and you can set it account by account. So my suggestion is to start conservative, watch it and then loosen it when you earn the confidence. Second is segregation of duties. The person who imports files and manages the rules should not be the person who reviews and signs off on the reconciliation. Intacct's permissions and approval workflows lets you enforce that separation. And third is the mindset shift. Automation clears to predictable, so your reviews stop rubber stamping hundreds of lines that were always fine and gives real attention to the few that need judgment. So that's not really less control, it's control aimed at where it matters. I'd like to note that the goal isn't a 100% match rate, right? Chasing that just creates loose rules and bad matches. It's to auto handle what's predictable and make the true exceptions easy to spot. Now let's move on to the exception process itself on the right. And this is where a good setup can go bad, right? When the rules are doing their job, what's left on the screen is the exception list. And the discipline is simple, but kind of easy to skip. Every unmatched item needs an owner and a next step. Work them continuously so nothing ages. A reconciling item rolling for 3 months is almost always one that fell off a list nobody owned. So one metric I track is your exception list shrinking month over month? And if it is, your rules are healthy and your process is working. If it's growing, that's kind of a warning for you to tune a rule or assign an owner. And you should do this, of course, long before it becomes a closed problem. So now let's look at what ties habits 1 to 3 all together. The last piece of the puzzle is to set a cadence to reconcile towards a target close date all month long. So think of it as 3 steps across the month, daily or weekly. You do that short feed review and clear exceptions in small passes. That's habits 1 and 3 working together. Now, a few days before close, you run a pre-close check. Is the exception list short? And does every item on it have an owner? Then at close itself, because you've been reconciling all month, the amount left to reconcile is already near 0. And so finalizing becomes a formality, right? So this is the whole argument of my section in one picture. When cash is continuously reconciled and rule-driven, it stops being the task that the entire close waits on. I really watch teams pull real days out of their month end by making this shift. They moved the work off from the month end cliff and then spread it across the month where each piece is now small, easy, digestible. So that's kind of the practical playbook, right? Reconcile continuously, let the automation clear the predictable, keep your controls and own your exceptions, and then run the whole thing on a cadence towards a target close state. Now, before I wrap up, I have one last poll question. Now, once again, I'm going to give you 20 seconds. Think about everything you've seen today. Which improvement would have the greatest impact on your team? Now, would that be more reliable bank imports or feeds, perhaps more automated matching, automated entries for fees and recurring activity, or a faster investigation of your exceptions? Now, once again, right to the CPA engagement check, there's no wrong answers here. It's one, genuinely useful for us because it tells us what folks in the industry, what their biggest constraint is today. All right. Now, I want to pull everything together, right? I'll tie it back to the 4 objectives we set at the start. 1, we identified where a manual bank rec breaks down, the line-by-line comparison, the volume across multiple accounts, the timing differences, and the hand-keyed errors that quietly age and hide. 2, we brought the bank's activities into Sage Intacct. Now, that's either through a bank feed over Sage Cloud Services or through the bank transaction assistant import, and Hank King discussed both. And 3, we streamlined the matching and reconciliation itself. Matching rules find what's already existed. Creation rules record the predictable. Bank-originated items like fees and interest. And then everything else surfaces as a clean exception. So the reconciliation becomes a short list instead of a full statement review. And 4, we covered the practical best practices to make it last. Reconcile continuously, let the automation clear the predictable, keep your controls and own your exceptions, and run it all on a cadence towards a target close state. So the quick takeaway is that this was never about removing accounting judgment. It's just about pointing your team's judgment where it matters, and that's the exceptions, right, instead of the everyday transactions. And if you're wondering how to set this up in your own environment, that's exactly what we help with. So just want to shout out, we have a program called Legible Smart Care. Think about it as a portfolio of services designed to help you get real value from your system. That includes implementation of Sage Intacct construction through Smart Start, unlimited dashboards and reports through Smart Reports, and unlimited end user support, training, and assistance through Smart Assist. So it's through Smart Assist that we can set up the bank reconciliation workflow what we walk through today. That's the feeds, the matching rules, the creation rules, and train your team on how to run it. And all this is through a budgetable monthly subscription in which we don't track hours. That's really our big differentiator. So if you'd like to explore the program further, feel free to reach out to me through email. So now Brian's going to close this out. On to you, Brian.
Thanks, Declan. Great job, Declan, Hong King. I want to make sure you guys are hanging around to answer questions.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Please go ahead and ask us questions.
Okay, good. And we do have 5 or 6 minutes for that. And let me just carve out 1 minute to give you an opportunity to ask a last minute question by using the Q&A button on the toolbar. Let me give you a minute for that and do a bit of advertising. On the screen, you can see that we've got 3 presentations that we give throughout the community and throughout the state. In fact, just in the last couple of days, we've given these first 2 presentations, why AI creates more accountants, not fewer, and then its complement, how AI creates more opportunity and not less. Those were made available to CPAs at the Texas CPA Society Summit 2026 event over the weekend in San Antonio. And then yesterday at the Metroplex Practice Management Group back here in North Texas. We're happy to bring those to business groups that you're a part of or into your firm, and each earns an hour to an hour and a half of CPE credit. That last presentation, Changing Technology, Creative Disruption, and the Accounting Profession, becomes even more relevant given the fact that the United States Congress is in final stages of deliberating the Clarity Act, which will make blockchain, a much more technology, a much more mainstream business process. And so that particular presentation helps clarify that. And then if you're out and about at different trade shows in the community, on that right hand side of the slide, you'll see that we'll be at the Southwest, our B Terrell group will be at the Southwest Veterinary Symposium in San Antonio in September. And then the Ledgerable team will be at the CFMA Lone Star Conference in Austin the next week. Next month's webinar, Beyond Budget Season, Building a Continuous Planning Process with Martis, applies to Sage Intacct construction customers who want to increase the automation in the budgeting process. Use that QR code to register for that. Okay, we have a quick question. Does the import function work for credit card transactions and then allow journal entries in creating the expense side? Punking?
Yeah, I guess the question, yeah, that's a good question. Now the bank fee support the bank the bank assistant import the new experience I would say now support the credit card transactions, and we're able to support a credit card transaction import. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And then those creation rules, do they post journal entries automatically? Or do you
Yes.
have to?
Yeah.
Okay.
They also post the journal entry automatically for the credit card transactions.
Okay. Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Here's another question. Can Sage Intacct automatically match a a transaction to a batch of transactions that Intacct records? That's often a challenge in bank reconciling.
Yeah, I could take that one. So I think Hanking briefly mentioned this in the presentation earlier. Intact can do that. So, a common example is when, say, a bank shows one combined ACH withdrawal, right? But on Intact, it contains several individual vendor payments. Intact can handle that. Another is, perhaps there are several bank deposits related to one summarized transaction in Intact. So these kind of matches would require you to, review them. It's harder to have them fully automated, setting that one-to-one rule. But overall, yes, you can group the related transactions and confirm that the totals agree, and then complete the entire match within the reconciliation process. It's doable. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's one other. How do we handle missing transactions that, are not in the bank feed?
Yes. That's a very good question. I've seen that a lot with other clients. Keep in mind that bank fee transactions may not appear immediately. They can arrive as early as the next business day after the posting the bank. But in some cases, it's maybe taken about like 5 business days for them to appear in the Intacct. So if the bank in the transaction is missing, first confirm that that they have posted at the bank, then review the bank's fee status in Intacct. If that is an authorization required, for example, that means the connection needs to be reauthorized, right? So if it's failed, that you need to reconnect it as well. Sage recommends not connecting and reconnecting the bank fees solely because the transactions are delayed. If you need to continue the reconciliations while waiting, you can import the missing activity to the bank transaction assistant import. So if the bank's fees later brings in like duplicate transactions, those transactions can be deleted. So there's no worry about that. So if no transactions appear, I would say after 5 days, if you still cannot see that, I would recommend submitting a support ticket to us, and you can then work with Sage support to troubleshoot the issues for you.
Okay. Okay. Great job, guys. And right on time. I want to say thank you for the hard work you guys did on preparing this. Thank you to Sophia and Shirley for the production of the event and also creating these gorgeous slides. And please be on the lookout for that evaluation form. If you're expecting CPE, you'll receive that in the next day or two, and we'll want you to reply to that and complete it quickly. So until next month, when we have our webinar on automating the budgeting process, have a great day.